Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Hamry. I want to welcome you to what's going to be a very, very interesting and important conversation. We're so privileged to have Chairman Kevin Brady with us today. He surprised us all a couple of days ago when he said he wasn't going to run for re-election. And I told him I really regret that, because he's been one of the most thoughtful and constructive leaders of the Congress these days. And so we're going to miss him, but I don't think it means that he is going to be away from the public policy arena, and I certainly hope not. Today, Chairman Brady is going to share with us his thoughts about trade policy. Now, the official title of this is that it's about the Republican agenda on trade. That's good, but I know Chairman Brady feels that he's really articulating a national strategy. He's worked well with his counterparts. He and Chairman Neal jointly introduced Catherine Tai at the nomination hearing for her to become the next trade representative. And because of Chairman Brady's and Chairman Neal's endorsement, it was a 98-0 vote. Well, that's not typical these days. So I think it shows the sense of larger purpose that Chairman Brady has always had as he's approached his role as being a leader for us on issues like trade policy. It isn't just trade policy, of course. He's very, very well known for having led the great tax reform back in 2007. And our topic today is going to be about trade. There might be some questions you may have about the tax issue, but let's focus it primarily on trade. He's a remarkable leader. I'm from South Dakota. He's from South Dakota. He moved down to Texas to become a leader in the Chamber of Commerce in Houston. And he represents, one of the most fast-growing districts in all of Texas. And he's served there with great distinction in the Congress. So we're very pleased, Chairman Brady, to have you with us. A little sad that you're going to be leaving the Congress, but we're very hopeful you'll continue to be a voice in public policy. Bill, let me turn to you for some introduction here before we turn to Chairman Brady.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hamry. I think you've said all the important things. We're start of a new administration, start of a new trade policy. We now have a U.S. trade representative unanimously confirmed. Things are starting to unfold in terms of trade. So this is a really good opportunity to hear from Mr. Brady about how he sees things developing in the Ways and Means Committee. I think everybody who works on the Hill in trade, and that includes both Madeline and me, one of the first things you learn up there is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which lays out the role of Congress in determining trade policy. And everybody that serves there reminds the executive branch of that relentlessly. And so the views of members of Congress, particularly on Ways and Means and Senate Finance, are extremely important in the making of policy. And I think we have a really good opportunity to hear from one of the key players in that regard. Congressman Brady is now in his 13th term, so he's been around for a while. Sadly, this is going to be his last one, and we're all disappointed about that. But he has a significant accomplishments to his credit. Most recently, I think the big one, shepherding through the last administration's tax bill. But he was also, a key player in the TPA process in 2015. And I think our current trade infrastructure, if you will, owes a great deal to him and the important role he played in shepherding through legislation that had been expired for a long time, and really set the stage for giving the administration options to pursue trade negotiations. Whether they're going to do it or not in this administration is one of the things that we're going to be discussing. So what we're going to do is Mr. Brady's going to make some comments, and then Meredith and I are going to chat with him. And I should also mention Meredith Broadbent, who is helping me on this. Former Ways and Means staffer, former member and chair of the International Trade Commission, and to our great benefit, one of our non-resident senior fellows here at CSIS. She and I are going to talk with Mr. Brady for a while, and then we will have time for your questions. And I think you all know what to do, how to do those. You'll submit them, and I will see them here, and we'll ask as many of them as we can. So with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Brady. Please go ahead.
Great. Well, Bill, thank you. First, Dr. Hamry, thank you for having me here today. You're really kind words, and especially too for the leadership of CSIS on so many key issues, including trade, security, and others. So thank you. And as I mentioned before, anytime I can be on a panel with Bill and Meredith, count me in. I admire and respect them, their leadership role, so many years in so many constructive ways. As you said, looking at the big picture of trade, I'm really, really thrilled to be here for all those reasons. So a couple quick thoughts. I think always, although we find ourselves facing enormous challenges, and we have a closely divided Congress and a new administration that has so far started on very much on a partisan bent, but over time, I'm hopeful we'll sort of see the merits of bipartisanship on issues like that. I think there's more we agree on than what gets reported, especially on trade. Let me lay out where I think Republicans and Democrats share common goals, as well as where I'm concerned that I worry that some of the administration's domestic policy may creep into trade policy and ultimately cause problems. So let's start with the bipartisan one. I think obviously you've got to begin with the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Now, not only did we put our differences aside, we got together and worked them out, I think, in a really substantial way. And at the end of the day, we all recognize trade is the greatest economic freedom we possess. It lies at the heart of our free enterprise system. Free trade, like free speech, isn't about cost. It is the freedom to trade. It's about preserving and expanding not just our collective, but our individual freedoms as America. You know, it is the ability to buy, sell, and compete anywhere in the world with as little government interference as possible. And that helps workers, customers, families, our job creators. And it's because trade policy provides, I think, such a rich opportunity for bipartisan cooperation. That's why I joined Chairman Neal in introducing Ambassador Tai at her Senate confirmation hearing. And as I said then, I'll say it again, trade policy is successful for American workers and for job creation only when there's a true partnership between the legislative branch and the executive branch about the goals and the execution of that trade policy. You know, I'm very hopeful we'll have a true partnership with this administration as well, but clearly we all have to work at it, and I'm all in for that. I think there's a lot been said recently about Democrats seeking a new worker-centric trade policy. I think that's always been our trade policy. I know for Republicans, certainly, we've long supported not simply buying American, but selling American all throughout the world, because that creates good jobs here at home. And I think, too, ensuring that our tax code is competitive around the world has been hugely helpful as well. I've always thought trade policy and trade agreements should not be seen as companies versus workers or consumers versus businesses or labor. It's just not an either-or situation. I think at the end of the day, trade agreements turn one-way trade into two-way trade, into America leveling the playing field for our workers so that we can sell those products and services throughout the world. And also, trade should not be viewed through what I think sort of a distorted lens that it's somehow damaging to the environment. I think the opposite. Trade policy actually can and does improve the environment. I've seen this firsthand on the border between Texas and Mexico as we used resources through NAFTA to help improve clean air, clean water, other environmental issues along our border. And I also think when you raise the standard of living, you help raise the standards of the environment. It is very difficult to worry about the monarch butterfly when you go to bed hungry and you don't have a roof over your head. When we raise the standards of living in countries around the world, we also raise their expectations of being able to do more for the environment. So I really think they're complementary. And I think too, to succeed for our workers and families, you gotta craft trade policy carefully, you gotta implement it faithfully, and it has to be aggressively enforced. But the key, and I think my point here today, if there is one major, it is trade must be pursued in the first place. We can't sit on the sidelines. I worry a bit about initial statements we've seen that the administration won't pursue either TPA or new trade agreements. I think that would be real harm to our American workers and certainly our economy. Let's start with unfinished business. Generalized system of preferences gives preferential access to certain imports from select developing countries that we want to encourage and help lift them up. The program benefits our U.S. manufacturers, it supports job creation, helps our families, and I think strengthens American leadership and standards around the world. I was sorry to see it expired in December. I thought we should have found a way forward, and at least our Democrat colleagues, we should have found a way to extend them rather than let them expire. Right now, I mean, today and every day that goes by, I think local employers who rely on the program to obtain raw materials that they have to manufacture here at home pay a price, including additional tariffs. And I think by increasing the cost to do business here, it really harms us, especially as we try to work out of this pandemic. The delay has real consequences for our businesses and families, especially right now. I think the same goes with the miscellaneous tariff bill. It's had a long history of bipartisan support, as Meredith knows, on Ways and Means. We've worked together, I think, beautifully across the aisle and in the Senate as well. It shouldn't have been allowed to expire. It is a tax hike of nearly $1.4 billion on American manufacturers. And again, delay costs jobs. We need to work on renewing both of them in a bipartisan way quickly. And I'm committed to doing my part for that. So looking ahead, as Bill asked, so what is the agenda going forward? Clearly, it requires creating a partnership on trade between Congress and the executive branch. We do have a lot of work to do. I believe the first step is to renew, without delay, Trade Promotion Authority, which for all practical purposes has already expired. Every president of any party should have this important tool, and it's important to understand why. TPA is about ensuring that our country has a coherent trade policy by establishing the negotiating objectives by Congress and agreeing on the specific process and the consultation, taking into account the views of Congress and the public. And we spent a lot of time on the last TPA creating more transparency for the public and for members, deliberately slowing the process down so the public, the business community, labor, and everyone can study these proposed agreements before they are signed, and really lengthening and deepening the consultation so that Congress and the White House are very much on the same page. That partnership between the White House and us really helps us achieve better trade policies. And without that unity, I think it's very difficult to negotiate and achieve new trade agreements. You know, our trading partners won't see us as serious and unified, and we lose opportunities here. We're going to have some pretty strong debate, I think, about the details and the format of TPA. Here's my point. We need to start discussing that now. We can't wait longer here. I'm confident we can work through the issues given, where we ended up for USMCA. But again, I worry the Biden administration isn't prioritizing this issue. But if we are to prevent China and our foreign competitors from racing ahead of us, we have to tackle this. And we've got to tear down barriers around the world. We got to tear down those America need not apply signs that too often appear on the planet. And at the end of the day, here's where we can agree as well. When you prioritize new trade agreements to tear down those barriers, you are standing up for American jobs, for American goods and services and American standards. It's very important this country lead and not abandon the trade field. Our foreign competitors certainly are not. China is not, and China's especially pulling out the stops to establish its own standards, as we know. And their standards come with unfair subsidies, state-controlled trade, deceptively easy money, which really jeopardizes our competitiveness and the strength of our economy. I also think this is an opportunity to establish, and strengthen our alliances with other countries. It bolsters certainly our economic recovery, but it establishes our standards worldwide, consensus standards. So in my view, we need to be looking at trade agreements with the UK, with Kenya, a comprehensive agreement with Japan. And as we see opportunities, other countries in the Asia Pacific, we should consider the EU as long as we can overcome the issues that have divided us in the past, which is digital trade, as you know, ag standards and services. The EU is such a big and longstanding partner with us, but we've had big and longstanding disputes with them as well. And I think a trade agreement is an opportunity to stop that division. And in some ways, I think we've exported those divisions into the world trade policy area, where we frankly could do some good work together and resolve that. So that I think is pretty important. As we all know, I'm going to talk about China in a second, but it's not just about negotiating, it's about enforcement as well. We have to hold our trading partners accountable. And we had a lot of good discussions on how to do that in the new USMCA before it passed Congress in a historic vote. So we have to make sure that strong historic vote is not undermined because Canada isn't living up to its obligations on dairy, or because Mexico is violating the agreement on things like energy, agriculture, digital trade, and facilitation of trade, another important part of USMCA. As it comes to trade with China, I am grateful that under the previous administration, we made meaningful enforcement progress. For the first time, we forced China to abide by US rules on agriculture and intellectual property. I think we've made considerable inroads in preventing China from stealing our technology. This has been a game changer for both our US job creators and our American workers. I hope the Biden administration will not only enforce the agreement we reached, but really build off its success and launch that next phase. I want our trade ambassador and the president to work with our allies to ensure they cooperate with us in the next phase. We are stronger together. Phase one was no easy lift, to say the least. Our economy bore the brunt by leading the negotiations. And so our allies need to come off the sidelines here and step up with us on correcting these distortions that frankly affect the whole world, especially, at least the allies should not slow us down in this effort. Which leads me to the World Trade Organization. I think it needs meaningful reform to be an effective institution in the modern economy. We need trade rules. We need rules-based trade, period. I think WTO members across the planet need to lean in hard with us to bring about some of these much needed changes. I'm absolutely convinced WTO has provided American job creators and businesses and families with real value, but real reforms can help the organization better tackle what stops us from selling American and what discourages, I think, countries about trade writ large. WTO can also lead by creating new opportunities for like-minded economies to establish ambitious new rules, such as on digital trade. And I think too, if some of the WTO members try to drag this effort down, we should consider creative, substantive process ways to help us all aim high in these solutions. These solutions, I think, can build momentum and be a confidence builder for even larger negotiations within the organization. I'm a big fan, and I'm going to push very hard to reinvigorate negotiations for environmental goods agreement within the WTO. I think this is key to addressing issues like climate change. I think the old thinking of the only way you can tackle this issue is drive the price of energy up for everyone, sky high, and then kill off oil and gas jobs. That's no longer necessary. I think the new modern thinking should be, don't make energy more expensive, make affordable energy cleaner. The US leads the world in these innovations in technology, much of it coming from my neighbors, oil and gas industry in Texas and the Houston region specifically, that is not only producing more, but dramatically cutting greenhouse gas emissions as you do. That innovation is really key. I want to see a world where environmental innovation and technology is sold tax and tariff-free around the world, so that we help every corner of the planet tackle climate change in a positive, affordable way. So look, Bill and Meredith, I've laid out a lot of ambitious goals here. I think, as you said, Ambassador Tai is incredibly qualified and gifted. I was proud to support her nomination because this is, I think, an area ripe and necessary for us to work together. But clearly the clock is ticking. So let's start with GSP and MTB immediately. Let's build the trade rules that can help us get back in the game, move quickly to TPA. Let's tear down those American need not apply signs around the world. So with that, I'd be glad to stop and take some easy questions from our audience today.
Well, we're going to start with the ones from Meredith and me, and which I think are easy questions. They're beginning to accumulate from the audience, and some of those are not so easy, but we'll save those for a little bit later. Meredith, why don't you begin?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Brady. It was a great vision and comprehensive agenda laid out there. Can you give us a sense on the impasse on MTBs and GSP? What's causing the delay?
Yes, so on GSP, for example, there is an effort by some of our Democrat colleagues, including the Trade Subcommittee Chairman, to really open up that program for environmental provisions, human rights, gender rule of law, good governance, things like anti-corruption, adding that to the criteria that are already in statute. I think we should be open to examining the eligibility. I just think we ought to extend it now while we continue those discussions. And obviously, as you look at expanding beyond what we have today, you really have to think about how these criteria work in practice. And you don't want them to become a barrier to eligibility. We want to help lift these countries up, want them to take steps toward two-way trade. We don't want this to be a barrier. My other thought is, as to the environment, I think the compromise we struck within USMCA is the correct approach. I think we have to be careful that trade policy reflect our American values in our laws. The Paris Accord has not earned domestic consensus. It is not in law, and I want to make sure our GSP criteria doesn't hold developing countries to higher standards than we have under US law. And again, as I said, every chance in these discussions, we get a chance to reduce tariffs on environmental technology and services, we ought to do that. MTB, I think, we had one, it's a great process we have now. Commerce, the Trade Commission have really played a key role here. We've rebuilt the approach on it. There were some last minute and I think unnecessarily large striking of provisions that didn't need to occur, that doesn't really fit with how we build MTB. I'm hopeful. We've continued to work with these offices to try to clear those last hurdles. But again, Commissioners, sooner rather than later is I think the policies here.
Got it. Good. And then any comments on TAA extension? Typically that goes along with Trade Promotion Authority.
Yeah, so it still needs to, in my view. Trade adjustment assistance, I think, is important. It's always been linked with our trade rules because it addresses the issue of if an agreement leaves a worker behind, let's give them the tools to reskill themselves and get back into the marketplace. I don't support sending that standalone because it should be paired with the job creating program, which is trade agreements. That's the right way to do it. I also know from experience that unlike our other job development and training programs, this really isn't compatible with the rest. It stands alone, it's isolated. I don't think it's been nearly as effective as it should be. I think both parties, frankly, could benefit by taking a hard look at some reforms within TAA because the goal is the same. Get people back to work, retrain, reskill them, and there's real opportunities here. But I just think we need to take a close look at how we improve that program.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
My turn. Let's go back for a minute to USMCA, which you discussed, and I should have mentioned that in your introduction. You deserve a lot of credit for getting that through. And I think what was most noteworthy about it, beyond the substance, is that it passed with 195 Democrats and 194 Republicans. And it's been a long time since we had a trade agreement that had that kind of bipartisan support. I think that's a tribute to the good work that you and Mr. Neal did and Catherine did when she was on the staff to try to bring that to conclusion along with Ambassador Lighthizer. But I guess there's two questions here. One is, was that sort of a one-off thing, or can you see a bipartisan consensus going forward, and what will it take to maintain that or to build it, particularly on the UK, but also Japan and Kenya? Do you think the Biden administration is going to go forward with those? And how do we maintain the same bipartisan approach if they do?
Yeah, Bill, I hope that it is not a one-off issue. I don't believe it is. We obviously found a way forward, and that historic vote was one of the most rewarding things I've seen on this House floor. Having worked, I think, on 14 of America's trade agreements, plus TPA and China and Russia and all that. And I confess, I told Ambassador Lighthizer that there was no way when he set out to build that type of consensus. I just said, I don't think that will ever happen. To his credit, it did. And so we have a lot of momentum to build off of there. So what I think is the success depends on several factors. One, the Biden White House needs to show an interest in negotiating new agreements. I hope they do sooner rather than later. Secondly, the president needs TPA. So start now, Congress, in putting those trade rules together. It's a prerequisite for Congress to be an informed and engaged partner so the White House can negotiate on our behalf. And I think, too, these negotiating objectives, as you know, Bill, need to be tailored to each of these regions or countries. They change depending upon who our potential trading partner is. As you know, I'm not fond of some things that were in USMCA, like the dispute resolution, ISDS, and the sunset provision. There's a lot of good that we can replicate and tailor to each of these potential partners, and I hope we do. There are great opportunities out there.
On going on to China for a minute, you've urged the Biden administration to develop a strategic plan for phase 2. including provisions on state subsidies and state-owned enterprises, and the same items that have been on the agenda for some time. The Trump approach to China was really unilateral. President Biden's been talking about a preference for approaching multilaterally. I guess the two questions: which do you think is the better approach, or the right approach? And do you think either of them really have a chance of success?
Yeah, so I would say initially President Trump did approach the long-standing China challenge with a more of a multilateral approach. He put together a trilateral effort with the EU and Japan to address some of the tough issues we face with China. He undertook significant efforts within the WTO to deal with it, but at the end of the day, he was determined to make progress. It just, I think, took too long for our trading partners to sort of get with the program. President felt he had to move ahead, and certainly while the exchange of tariffs is, was a tough medicine, I think for all of us who believe tariffs are taxes, that lowers better and zero's the best. Clearly, America sort of took that on to negotiate that phase one deal, but it was important that it get done. So I welcome our trading partners to join with us here. I do think considerable pressure can be put on China to develop real rules and live by them in all these key areas. I will commit now to working with President Biden and Ambassador Tai to help them establish a united front with our trading partners against China. But we can't let the clock run out either. I want a phase two agreement, both for the policy and because I think it's not enough to just pause tariffs. I think we need to begin subtracting them. And the sooner we see a phase two agreement or a multilateral approach, the quicker we'll see that.
Okay, thank you for that. Meredith, let's go back to you for a couple.
Yeah, Chairman Brady, last year you voiced support for tax incentives to encourage U.S. companies to relocate production lines for critical medicines and medical supplies from China to the U.S. Should we focus on reshoring, or should we strengthen cooperation with allies and trusted partners to ensure that we have adequate supplies of these products in the future?
Well, Commissioner, the answer is we should do both. And I imagine you agree with that. So we should create Republicans' Ways and Means. So start over. Lessons learned from COVID. We're far too reliant on China in a number of crucial medical areas. Ways and Means Republicans, our members did a really great job developing and introducing legislation to make America medically independent from China on certain things, crucial medicines, medical supplies, the ingredients to make both, and key technologies. I'm convinced that if we have aggressive, smart tax incentives, we can anchor production in the U.S. while continuing to really run through supply chains of reliable trading partners. I think we can do both of those. I think that is exactly the right way to do it. It's a win-win, both for the U.S. and for our trading partners. I think it accelerates these medicines, these vaccines, these medical supply distribution throughout the world. Another lesson learned from COVID. So anchor, run through reliable trading partners, build that partnership would be the strategy that I support.
Great. What will Republicans prioritize during congressional consideration of infrastructure legislation? Can Congress pass a bill that will attract manufacturing investment to the U.S.?
So the good news is Congress already has. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as you know, drew $1.5 trillion back of American profits almost immediately. Tech companies brought their patents in their research and development back to the United States, 25% burst in just 2 years at record levels. I think here's a number that's a bit shocking, 4,700. 4,700 businesses over a period inverted or were bought by foreign competitors or moved elements of their business overseas because our tax code drove them to that. The old tax code did. Under the new tax code, that number went to zero, nada. It stopped cold. And so we already have in place a very competitive tax code that allows our businesses to compete and win anywhere in the world, including here at home, and has made America not just the most competitive economy on the planet before COVID, it also made America one of the best places in the world to invest. I think it's really important we continue that. As you probably heard me say, I think these business taxes, especially as we try to recover from this pandemic, making us worse as a tax rate than China, on the same par with Syria. In the way it's redesigned, I think it will slow hiring in the US. It certainly will reduce investment. I think it will trigger over time a second wave of US companies moving elements overseas. And I think it is a serious economic blunder. And it really negates those taxes. To close with this, those taxes increases actually negate the economic growth that you'll see from infrastructure. There is bipartisan support for infrastructure, but not at the expense of American jobs. I'm really hopeful that the administration calls time out on this rush, really sits down both in the House and Senate. I'm confident we can find a package in a bipartisan way that really works for the US here and around the world.
Okay.
Okay, we've got some more questions, but the audience questions are beginning to mount up. And I want to give them a chance. So I'm going to go through a few of those, and some of them overlap, so I'm going to do some combining here. So audience, pay attention. If you don't find your question exactly phrased exactly, it's in there. The first one, we got a couple questions about Africa, which we haven't really talked about before, which I think is going to be a topic of conversation over the next few years for sure. And the question is, African diaspora business people in this country have not benefited from AGOA to the extent they could have. And while the last administration did make outreach to the diaspora on trade through its Prosper Africa proposal, where do you think this fits in with US trade policy toward Africa today? What do you see happening with Prosper Africa?
I think there is broadly bipartisan support for developing much stronger relationships in Africa. There's multiple good reasons for doing that. I think both parties can agree on. I hope, as we talked about Kenya, it worried me that those discussions were getting hijacked over just a few environmental issues. I worry about that sort of rearing its head again. I would love to see the administration begin to strengthen those relationships in a meaningful way, identifying those countries, perhaps the regions where we can start first. I think, some people get upset about talking about a win-win situation in trade, but I see real opportunities for progress with the US partnering just much more deeply and closely with Africa. And as I talk to their leaders when they come to visit, I think there's an authentic desire to build those relationships. So let's do it.
Okay, we're going to bounce around a little bit. That was very helpful, but we've got a questioner who wants to go back to the miscellaneous tariff bill. As you noted, it didn't make it to the finish line last year in the 116th Congress. So the question is, do you believe Congress has authority to, does Congress authority to deal with the issue carry over into the 117th Congress? Because the original MTB bill was only authorized for the 115th and 116th Congresses. So do we need new authority, or do we just need to pass the bill, or what needs to happen to get moving on MTB?
So Bill, I need to probably check that process to make sure I give you an accurate answer. My first assumption is that the work, the vetting, the process, I think worked very well and was done correctly for that MTB. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be reintroduced in this session at that stopping point. And then, internally, we are working with those few remaining members of Congress who have concerns. I'm really hopeful we can find a resolution with them. So I don't think there's really anything other than those final issues that should slow this down. And in my sense of Chairman Neal, I don't want to speak for him, is that he sees the importance of this too, and in timeliness matters.
Here's one that you had to know was coming. I can't resist. During the last Congress, there were multiple bills introduced to amend Section 232, including proposals to increase the role of Congress or the Department of Defense, or impose limits or other changes to the delegation authority. Is there still appetite in this Congress to pursue 232 reform? If so, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so great question. I don't know. These other issues have really sucked all the oxygen out of a number of those. I assume there still is appetite for that. Clearly, Congress wants to strengthen our authority and power in these areas. I think with the change in presidency, there's probably more of an opening for that conversation where it's not a Congress versus the White House in your face discussion, but probably a little more thoughtful and comprehensive, where a little less politics in there. So yeah, I think my sense is, Bill, there is real interest there, and the environment may be very good for that discussion.
Okay. Do you think India should follow with the GSP, even if the dairy and medical device export issues aren't entirely resolved? Do you think there would ever be an opportunity to add apparel to GSP? No controversial question too.
Yeah.
Would there ever be an opportunity to add apparel to GSP, or are domestic voices simply too loud about that?
Yeah, so I think on India, certainly, I supported the action to suspend them off GSP. I did work closely and visit with Ambassador Lighthizer about how reforms could be made to move them back into GSP, and he certainly was making a strong effort to do that. I think that's important. India, I think, is the potential for trade in partnership with India, I think, is sky high in a good way, but they've often taken U-turns on trade that have been a little troubling. And I was hopeful that these discussions maybe could set us both on a much better long-term path, that's the right direction for the long term. So I'm still hopeful of that. And on apparel and textiles, GSP really is about those non-controversial issues. I just think I've worked in this area a long time. I understand exactly the arguments for this. My guess is it would be extremely difficult to expand in that area. That's my sense of it.
Okay, moving into the high-tech area a bit. A wide variety of polls show that trust online is decreasing in the wake of cyber theft, disinformation, malware, all the things that we read about every day. What should happen in the digital trade space to build greater trust? Is there anything that can be done? Is there a legislative role here?
I think a good start has been in USMCA and more of the modern discussions to make sure we get digital trade right with our trading partners. I think that helps in a major way. I agree, consumer confidence in privacy, and actually I think the angst and anxiety of all that continues to rise, as certainly back home where I live and work. I think there is a role for Congress to play, and there's some ideas. I think more and more members of Congress, House and Senate, are developing those ideas. You know, I don't have a specific bill that I would endorse or say this is the solution, but we've got a lot of smart members who developed some good ideas. And I think I'm confident this issue is not going away. So let's address it.
Okay, here's a question from another of your former staff members who shall remain anonymous.
So Bill, is this like a grill the congressman day from my former team?
Pretty much, yes. This is an interesting question though. And it starts out with a compliment. Thank you for reminding us of the importance to sell America. Which I think is an important, we've kind of lost that, you know, as I think you pointed out, the last administration's emphasis was on stopping imports. The real gain of trade is in promoting exports. So the question is there anything new that you would like to see in the next TPA, either in negotiating objectives or ensuring that Congress maintains its constitutional authority in trade that would help promote exports?
Yeah, so I have really focused more on getting the architecture of trade right, rather than specific issues within it. They can change depending upon the times, the strength of what Congress wants to put in there, and regional industry issues. Getting the architecture right, those trade rules, the consultation, how we resolve disputes, for example, how we streamline, facilitate trade, what are the consultation, how transparent are we both in building the trade agreement, implementing it, and enforcing it. That's always where I'm convinced if we do that right, the rest will follow in a big way. So that's where I'll be focusing. And again, you know, like with NAFTA moving to USMCA, it needed updating on certain issues, but that architecture needed updating too, on trade facilitation and how we resolve disputes and how we handle issues. That's going to be my focus.
Okay, moving on. Here's a very topical question, since it's been in the news actually yesterday and today, and that is the demand by India and South Africa for a waiver on vaccine IP, so they can produce it themselves. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so we already have in place globally a process for countries to be able to address those patent delays and replicate and manufacture in those public health emergencies. I also understand the biggest problem here is really, I think, the logistics of vaccine distribution, the supply of vaccine distribution, all solvable problems, in my view, without undermining the patents and the research that really turned out to be a miraculous acceleration of medicines, vaccines for this pandemic. I don't think another silver lining is that we now know that with a concerted effort, we can accelerate tenfold safe vaccines in real diseases with remarkable speed. I think there's a big good news story here, and we need to be very careful about undermining that development, that reaction and response through whips. So I think it's a wrong direction to go. I think we need to address the logistics, infrastructure, the supply of this. That I think is the solution.
Thank you for that. I noticed we've got a question on the environment. Ambassador Tai gave a speech just a couple hours ago on trade policy and the environment, trade policy and climate change in particular. And I missed it. I was doing something else. But the report of it I read said that, as she has before, she made a very strong statement in support of a trade policy that promotes dealing with climate change aggressively. But she did not offer a lot of specifics as to what that means or how to do it. She also did not indicate that she didn't say whether or not the United States is going to go forward with try to restart environmental goods agreement negotiations, which a number of your colleagues, as you know, have urged the administration to do. Let me ask both sort of a general and a specific question. The general one is, what role can trade policy play in the fight against climate change? And what makes sense legislatively? What can you do? I mean, besides pass a resolution saying this is really a good thing, what concrete actions can really be taken?
Yeah, so I think there are two that are very substantive. One, we need to trade more with more partners. When we do so, environmental standards in our trading partners countries tend to go up, or we develop better relationships on specific issues separate from trade that allows us to make progress. So get back in the game, both in the agreements that have been really sort of laid on the table and ready for action by the Trump administration, but also look for those new partners. I think that's the first. And again, I cannot not underscore the importance of innovation technology for addressing climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Driving energy up, the price of it hurts poor countries and poor people, working families everywhere. It destroys jobs. It's just simply flat earth thinking. Making affordable energy for the world and making it cleaner is the solution. And I would jumpstart the environmental goods agreement tomorrow, and I would be extremely ambitious on how broad the eligibility for these technologies and innovations are. And I would look for ways to pressure all countries to not only eliminate tariffs, but lower taxes. Anything that drives the cost of these innovations and technologies down, so the countries that aren't, don't have, the same standard of living of ours as we do, can afford these innovations in technology. Let's help the planet tackle this issue.
The next one is, I'm happy to see because it relates to something that actually Meredith did a lot of work on for us a little bit earlier this year, which was a look at the pharmaceutical supply chain, where we recommended not make everything in America, but build relationships with trusted partners and build supply chains that are reliable, but not go to autarky to try to make everything here. And the question really is about that, which is, do you think Congress is going to be able to include the reliable trading partner or trusted trading partner concept when it deals with infrastructure legislation, or is just support for Buy American going to overwhelm that debate?
I suspect the second will prevail. That just seems to be the sense that I have within the new administration. But I don't think that's the full and right answer here. We've got an opportunity to make our supply chains dramatically more reliable and resilient. Companies want to make that happen. The reason we introduced the tax incentives was to position America to anchor those crucial medicines, medical supplies, ingredients, and technologies. I think it's crucial that these chains run through our reliable trading partners as well. That's just good for everyone, for jobs, for reliability and resilience, and for accelerating those supplies of medicines around the globe. So, I would anchor production with good, smart incentives, run it through reliable trading partners. The whole world will be more resilient if we take that approach.
Okay, the next one, we're getting near the end here, but there's a few more Is Congress looking at ways to address trade-based money laundering? We are seeing a proliferation of bad players using quote unquote legitimate trade to wash ill-begotten money. Is there anything Congress can do about this? Is anybody thinking about it up there?
You know, Bill, I bet there is, but I don't know who it is. So let me check into that and see who is working on that right now. I mean, obviously, you know, we deal with a lot of issues on trade that aren't in these trade agreements. China's, you know, production of fentanyl and the smuggling of that into the U.S. We addressed together, both parties, I think, in very good legislation just recently, and we're starting to see results by tying their commitments to on transparency and trusted shippers and all of that, insisting that there be changes. We're already seeing a difference there. I would think using the same model on money laundering could produce, you know, substantial results as well. But I'll be honest, this isn't an area that I'm aware of a lot of activity in, but there may well be. Let me go do my homework.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me go back. One of the questioners, I think, wants to press just a little bit on China. I think the basic thrust of the question is most Americans agree on what needs to be done. If we go back to phase 2, we'll be talking to them about state-owned enterprises, about technology transfer, the things we both mentioned. Do you think it's really realistic to expect that China is going to agree to disciplines in those areas? And if not, what do we do then?
Well, if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Whether it's the tariff side or the subsidies, the state-owned enterprises, the easy money subsidies in China. I don't know that the status quo really works there. I don't want to say that these negotiations would be easy or immediate. They wouldn't. I thought I'm absolutely convinced the Trump administration front-loaded a number of the biggest issues and disputes we have with China in that first agreement and set specific timetables. I was very surprised by the detail of that, given in the past, China, one, has usually refused to sit down and discuss these issues. Two, when they do, the commitment is so vague, it's hard to know what we agreed to. And then third, there's no enforcement of that anyway. That all changed, I think, with phase 1, but we have more work to do there. I'd like to see this administration, they're fully capable, by the way, of negotiating a strong enforceable agreement with China that addresses the remaining issues. And then with the commitment to reduce or eliminate those tariffs. China, as you know, is challenging America here and abroad. In the new administration, I think this is an area that will test the Biden administration. I think they are certainly capable of rising to the occasion here. I hope they don't assume because President Trump negotiated this that it's not appropriate for them to tackle this issue. I actually think this is, politics aside, this is an area of agreement in Congress about China's subsidies. So yeah, it won't be easy, very important to do. I would make it a priority.
Well, thank you for that. We're at the hour, but I want to squeeze in one more if you have a minute. And that's another timely issue, which is comment, if you would, about the digital service tax negotiation. Here's an issue that involves both trade and tax. It's very important to American companies, particularly high-tech companies. The Biden administration has just done some things that have hopefully jump-started the negotiations. Are they doing the right thing? And where do you see this going? Is it going to have a happy ending, or are we going to end up fighting the Europeans?
Yeah, so short answer is I'm not sure they're taking the right steps here initially. There is a lot of concern on Capitol Hill that we will be party to negotiations that ultimately are a revenue grab on American companies, but more importantly, would surrender America's tax base to our foreign global competitors. And the truth of the matter is, this is almost a zero-sum game. For every dollar that is paid in federal taxes, that comes out of the U.S. Tax base. That means we have less revenue to address our issues as well. So a lot of sensitivity about the digital services tax. I also think that the leadership on a global minimum tax is wrong-headed. I can't imagine America going to our global competitors and saying, we are voluntarily becoming less competitive and weakening our competitiveness abroad. Will you please join us in that? I don't believe they'll agree to this when we're sabotaging our own competitiveness. I just don't believe our foreign competitors will do that. And I also think that's actually leading us on a race to the bottom. These higher taxes and a global minimum tax would actually lead us in a race to the bottom of growth and productivity as well. So I worry that the Biden administration will trade one off for the other, and ultimately America is very much a net loser twice in those discussions. So yeah, this is a big area of concern for me and a number of the members of Congress and Ways and Means.
Well, I hate to end on a down note, but we've gone beyond the time, and you've been very gracious, and you answered, I think, a record 13 or 14 questions from the audience, not to mention the ones that you got from Meredith and me. So we really appreciate that. I think we managed to cover the waterfront, and I learned a lot. I think, Meredith, do you have any final words before we say goodbye?
No, it was a great presentation, and your mastery of the depth of the Ways and Means Committee's jurisdiction is amazing, and we're going to miss you, but you contributed so much, and the ability to fill them.
Well, Meredith, you're kind, but as you know, we have a great trade team, always have. This is an issue you're always learning. You can never be an expert on all of this, kind of like the tax code or healthcare. And that's where I'm blessed. Our whole committee is as well. And this trade is not a down note. We are very good at this. There are real opportunities here. We've got a great momentum from USMCA, and I'm really hopeful we sort of jump off from that momentum and do more together. I think there's really positive opportunities here.
Excellent.
Well, that's a better note to end on. Meredith, go ahead. So,
no, that's excellent. That's perfect.
Thank you two very much.
Better note to end on. You're going to be missed, but we appreciate you giving us the time, and we're lucky we've got you for another year and a half. So
yes, sir. Well,
we'll talk again.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much. To
Thank
the
you,
audience,
sir.
thank you and goodbye.
Bye now.